Hey guys, welcome back. In today's video, we are talking about the AMC share count, the offshore swaps, the bad news for shorts, and many more in this video. First, we're taking a look at this. If we review the expols over the last 2 years, we've gone from 10x to 45x the number of shares held by retail. Essentially, what we've seen is how shares held has increased, the distortion, the number of floats has steadily increased, retailers have been buying the entire time, shorts are stuck. And we've seen plenty of different evidences from this. Firstly, you can see here from different users taking different polls on the AMC share holders, you can see everyone is coming out to a very big extent of I haven't sold, and I have added on to how many shares I have. You can see some goes over with, we are seeing 41% of these particular votes that are going from 1,000 to 9,999 shares. Now, of course, this is a very small sample because we're only looking at 313 votes here, over here 426, 9,400, 8,600, which it's a bigger extent in comparison to some other ones, but when we talk about the total amount of shareholders there is for AMC, it's obviously a small sample, but it still kind of shows just how much shares have been bought and are being held by the AMC investors. Because a big reason for this is that we're not only are we seeing kind of the shares being this big, but actually they are increasing. What we are seeing is that every time this vote has been started again, if the last vote was half a year ago, you will tend to see that actually more people are choosing the bigger option because they've bought more shares of AMC. Now, this is very important because it obviously talks about the amount of synthetics. It talks about how much they've created, how many times the float has been bought by the retail, which ultimately leads to what the squeeze price would be. And if we take a less conservative method, a more realistic of midpoint values where AMC shares held by retails from the recent poll, you can see that there are 97 more shares, 97 times more shares held by retails than the available public flow. Now, once again, this is done with a small sample of data, and I want to make that very, very clear. But I think it's still very useful to understand what is going on for AMC because we know that this practice has been happening for a long time. We know that there are rehypothecations of AMC shares. Yes, we can't get an exact accurate count, but we are able to use data to kind of derive to a certain answer. And you can see from this poll where we've seen 168 votes, with 32.1% choosing from 1 to 5,000. And you're seeing some with coming in at 5,000 shares, 10,000 shares, and 20,000 plus. Now, we've seen on Twitter, and again, there's some of this data may be fabricated because people are just clicking on random points, but we have seen how there are certain users who owns over hundreds of thousands of shares of AMC. We've seen people buy over 100,000 shares of AMC within a week. And so that's why, to me, to see numbers like this is very believable. And if we take a look at this, you can see that they derive to what we see here, 96.9x the public float available, where we're looking at 31.25 billion shares held by retail. Now, I know it's extremely hard to believe this because when you take a look at how many shares of AMC there should be versus how much of a synthetic float there is in its extreme number, 97 times, it's obviously ridiculous. It's obviously hard to believe, but we know that something like this is happening. Once again, we don't know the exact data. We don't know the exact precise amount of shares, but it's why to me that whilst it looks like it's absurd, whilst it looks like it's such a big amount, I do believe that there is that possibility of this being true. Because if we've seen from other data as well, is that not only are we talking about kind of the extra shares that are ongoing, we see that the total return swaps for AMC. And firstly, these are offshore total return swaps. So we know that a lot of these don't have to be reported. But not only that, we've seen from the reported swaps as well in the past before about how those have actually seen an increase. And so it's just why I've said there are so many data that are just pointing to the fact that there are synthetic shares of AMC, that the float has been created many times over. And so it's why I say when I see a data point that shows we are seeing 30 billion synthetic shares, whilst it may seem ridiculous, whilst it may seem shocking to believe, to me, I do believe that there is a chance of that to be true. And so it's how we know that because of how many synthetics there are, because of how big this has become, they will have to pay a very, very severe price for this. And it's why we're seeing them trying to attack AMC right now. You can see out of all the things AMC is currently doing, including breaking records, this is the news they want to run with. I suppose the good thing AMC stock is under $2 for the sake of this article, or else they run with his pay package being outrageously high. He actually only took home his base salary around 1.56 million. Everything else is tied to the stock, which obviously fluctuate. So what is this news about? And you can see how they talk about the executive pay package marks a 31.9% increase from 11.4 million in 2024, targeting Adam Aron. Now, we've seen recently how multiple news articles are trying to target Adam Aron and paint him as a bad person, paint him as someone who's making bad decisions as an executive. But we know that that obviously isn't the case. And you can see how this article is used with the intent of painting that image once again, because what they fail to say is what the base salary is. They fail to say that the number that they're deriving from is from the shares that is held by him. And you can see the article frames compensation using accounting optics, not economic reality. When the stock is down 90 plus equity heavy pay packages on a windfall, they're largely paper value that has already evaporated. Again, news articles fail to explain this, they fail to highlight this, and they try to do the thing where they paint Adam Aron as a bad thing because they want to force him to get out. And for that, to me, it just feels like Adam Aron has something that's able to easily take these shorts down, or at least be able to have a heavy blow. And it's why they've been trying recently so much to take Adam Aron down as the CEO. You can see another showcase of this of bad news articles. If you go on Yahoo News and you go into AMC and you go into the news section, what you will see is that an article is linked to AMC where they're talking about this company, AMC Global Media, AMC X, and they're talking about that with AMC. You can see they link the negative news, which is entirely unrelated to the company, right before the Q1 earnings. It may well very be sheer algorithmic stupidity, but it creates confusion and a very incorrect negative sentiment about AMC. Now, we talked multiple times about this, about why they do this. Firstly, they use this to target any retail who's looking to invest into AMC but has no idea what's happening behind the scenes. And you can understand this for someone who's trying to look, because now we're seeing how this industry is booming. We're seeing the AMC being the #1 company. You obviously would have an interest in buying AMC. But if you're seeing negative articles, you might then double think yourself. You might then double guess yourself and look into other companies. And that's what they're trying to do firstly, to target people who has no idea about what's happening with AMC. Secondly, we talked about this. There are algorithms used by institutions that targets news that use and bases their decision whether to long or short, firstly, depending on the ticker it mentioned, depending on the news articles it found itself in, and then the sentiment. So if we're seeing an article like this, which is tied to AMC, and then it's talking about a decline, you can imagine how that can be used to influence certain algorithms to short AMC. And this is what we've said with how they're using bad news to target against AMC. And again, some other things that they're failing to then highlight is firstly, the partnership with Netflix that's authorized the world release of February 12, 2027 in movie theaters globally. So very importantly, with a traditional 49-day exclusive theatrical window of the newest film, Narnia. Now, this is very important because it has given us so many different signals, because the same company that was supposed to kill theaters now needs them. We saw how people came out to say that Netflix was going to overtake AMC, overtake the entire industry, yet now they're coming to us. But it doesn't stop there, because they are abandoning streaming first and going to theater first format for the first time ever. This is literally just showing how big this is. And remember, who is going to benefit the most from this? Who has the most screens within the market? Who has the biggest kind of market share? AMC. And so if we're seeing this happening, and we're seeing that not only is the theater industry going to benefit from this, but the ones who have the most screens going to benefit from this, you can understand how AMC is once again at the forefront. And this is a decision that was being taken by Adam Aron in the past before. So you can see why we talk about how they want to target bad articles, how they want to paint Adam Aaron as a bad person for people to then try and push him out of the company. And we've always talked about this. It isn't to say that Adam Aaron is the best CEO ever, that every decision he's made has played perfectly, but he has never made a decision that was used to put AMC in the bad place. Every decision, the mind behind it has been for good intentions, and we've seen exactly that for AMC. And so far for me, I can't think of any other person who has shown that capability to put AMC on the map like Adam Aaron has. And we can see Adam Aaron is extremely excited about everything that's ongoing. Firstly, we are seeing some good news. We can see Devil Wears Prada is a blockbuster success. We're seeing the Actors Union reach a new multi-year deal with film producers. And so this is what we're looking at. So firstly, more than 4.4 million guests at AMC theaters and Odeon cinemas affirm that big opening weekends are staying in fashion in 2026. Once again, AMC profiting off of this. You can see why this is important, and you can see why they still want to focus on the premium screens, because they already see how well the market is going right now, and they just want to take as much market share as they can. And that's exactly what we want to see. That means more revenue, that means more profit, that means higher chance of debt being paid off, higher chance of dividends being issued. You can understand why this is good. Then what we can see is why this is obviously bad news as well for the shorts, is that everything we've just talked about so far up into this video, and of course, we're seeing how the threat of another strike is off the table. So what we saw in the past before, where a strike greatly damaged and impacted the box office, we're not going to be seeing that happening. And that's exactly what we want. And the Q2 2026 is already crushing it. We're only barely into May, and we're already seeing how the releases that are going that have come out has already done well for the box office, and why AMC is then going to profit off of this. This is what we talked about, how we're now on kind of that snowball effect where it's only going to get bigger and bigger because of what we've done in the past. And the worst thing that you can do is compare AMC to the old AMC without realizing that this is not the same company anymore. Firstly, we've closed off over 200 underperforming theaters over the last few years and focused on upgrading stronger locations. And this is why we've said we're getting a bigger market share, why we're seeing the partnerships with Netflix as an extremely good thing, because we're going to be profiting off of this. Trim the flat, cut weak locations, reduce debt, build new revenue streams. So if you're still comparing AMC with the old AMC, whilst not accounting for everything that they've done already, that's a very grave mistake that you are making. And if we're seeing how in terms of where we are, I do believe that, we are at kind of the beginning of a run now, especially with everything that's ongoing, with the fundamentals, with the technicals. We are really positioning ourselves for a very bright future. And I think especially at times like this, is to truly attest whether GME and AMC are part of the same basket of swaps, derivatives. The reason why I say this is because there have been so many things happening, and we're already seeing the pressure happening. Firstly, GME has talked about some amazing things, talking about an offer to acquire eBay. Now, why is this good for GME? It's because eBay previously, and this is only a part of it, but they acquired a company which is the king of collectibles, where they are the global card grading services. And this is going to put on to GME's existing operational structure, which we talked about how they need to improve. So now what we're going to be seeing is not only is GME previously going to have a healthy cash pile, but didn't have a really successful operational structure, now they will have that. And that's what we want to see. And we can see how this is important. We can see how this is going to be damaged from the shorts, because we're seeing how shorts and the media articles are still calling GME a meme stock company. A meme stock company that's going to buy a 56 billion bid for eBay. And yet they're still calling it a meme stock. It really goes on to talk about how they're always trying to paint a bad image for AMC, for GME, because they realize what will happen if no one in terms of the retail space can't be faulted by them anymore. And that's what they are afraid of. And now we're seeing, so originally when the news came out, we saw GME surge over 9%. Now today we're seeing the decline, but we obviously understand the reason for that. And we also saw the AMC decline today. You can see with the price action is why I said earlier about the same basket. GME pre-market, we saw great things happening. AMC today, we saw AMC in the green. But then both stocks are being pressured. Why is that? Two stocks, unrelated, yet have the same price action. It goes on to talk about what is going on. And now we're seeing is that MMTRP, this is something we still need to focus on, because we saw how the judge have ordered for the materials to be released about MMTRP. We're now seeing certain firms kind of fighting against it and not wanting to produce any information. Why would you do that if you're not worried about what happened, if you're not worried about what you have done? And this is the reason why. Now, a big thing today as well is kind of what's happening in the market. We're still seeing turbulence. We're still seeing some sort of uncertainty. You saw $520 billion of raise from the US market. This is nothing major in the sense that, we're not seeing stocks crashing 20% one by one, but it still talks about how volatility can happen at any time, meaning that the institutions, the short sellers, can run out of margin at any time. As always, this is financial advice, and I'll catch you guys next time.